Hey friends, it's Pastor Scott with some extra seed for Romans chapter 6. One of the really incredible things when we think about this letter that Paul writes to the Romans is a few things. First of all, he had never been to Rome. He is writing to introduce himself because he hopes to get there. And so he's looking forward to meeting with the Romans. But it's also, this letter is actually a missions support letter. We've been talking about how Paul sees Jesus' death and resurrection and the giving of the Spirit as the sign that the end of the age has come. So if we were to ask Paul, hey, do you think it's the end times? He would say, absolutely. It's the end times, not because things are going bad, but because God has sent Jesus. It fulfills the prophecies that the inclusion of the Gentiles in the covenant people of God, that's the sign that we're coming to the end. So he is wrapping his whole understanding of the end times as the inclusion of the Gentiles and the preaching of the gospel to what he understood as the ends of the earth. Here's what I mean. In Romans, he is not only talking about how this is the proof that God is by sending Jesus, is going to wrap things up soon. But then he says, I can't wait to get to Rome to preach the gospel to you, but I'm not going to stop there. I desire to go all the way to Spain. So at the time, Hispania was one of the Roman provinces, and it was the furthest one to the west. As far as the people of the first century knew, that's where the map ended, right? At the Atlantic Ocean. And so if I could get to Spain, in Paul's mind, that would mean the gospel has been preached in all of the known nations at that time. And in Paul's mind, then Jesus can come back. He was writing a mission support letter believing if the Roman church, which had some wealth, if you'll support me to not only get to Rome, but to keep going, that will fulfill the Great Commission, which Jesus himself said, when this gospel is preached to all the nations, then the end will come. That's Matthew 24:14. Paul took that to heart. And the Romans letter is a mission support letter saying, if you can get me there, the Gentiles will have heard the gospel. Now, we now understand that the map was much bigger than what Paul knew. But Paul was driven by a passion of knowing that the giving of the Spirit, the death and resurrection of Jesus meant that God was introducing a whole new age. So my friends, are we living in the end times? Yep, absolutely. Ever since the death and resurrection and the giving of the Spirit, it's been the end times. Paul believed it in his day. Our challenge is to believe it as well. If we can continue to bring the gospel that Paul preached of good news in Jesus all the way to all the nations of the earth, then we see the end of this age, and Christ can return and the end will happen. All right, just something to think about with some extra seed for this week.